Hello my precious little dragons, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you're having an absolutely awesome day. Aria is joining me here in filming today, so I'm praying she behaves. Today I'm going to be kind of doing a 3-in-1 book look, and I'm going to actually be going over the 3 Fredrik Backman books that I read. So this was my first time reading Fredrik Backman at all, but he came very highly recommended, specifically by Murphy Napier. And I mean, you've watched a lot of my videos. I mentioned her quite a bit. She's an awesome booktuber. You should definitely check her out if you haven't. I started with Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer, and that one is just a short little novella and it just broke me. And then I read Anxious People and A Man Called Ove around the same time, and those two were also very good, although I would still say And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer is by far my favorite. Anyway, so I just kind of wanted to do a book look that encompassed kind of all 3 of them because I didn't really have an idea for each specific one, so I just wanted to kind of do what I feel like Backman's work just like emits to me, which is something ordinary that turns very special. Because I feel like one of his core strengths as an author is that he's very good at examining humanity, and he's very good at taking these like everyday things that people deal with and turning them into something very poignant and powerful and something that is very, very special. Like, he takes the mundane and makes it unique, and it's amazing, and I love it. Granted, not all of the books deal with the mundane, because Anxious People deals with like a bank robber who's not a bank robber, and a hostage situation that's not a hostage situation, and it's very unusual circumstances, but it still deals with very real, kind of poignant circumstances that lots of people relate to. I'm gonna kind of take it a little bit differently than a lot of my other book looks, just because, you know, I'm dealing with multiples. So I don't think I'm going to really have spoilers, just because it's kind of a 3-in-1. It doesn't super make sense. It doesn't super make sense to have spoilers. So I'm just going to kind of take the 3 books sort of in the order I read them and just talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each one and kind of just how it made me feel. Who needs a mirror when you have a field monitor? Makes me feel like a pro. Ooh. Is it just mirrored? Do my eyes look really blue? They kind of look really blue. Sorry, I'm so distracted today. Today was the first day of my 2nd semester of grad school, and whew, I have a lot to think about. I'm getting started on my 2nd year research project this semester, and I'm starting to think about like fellowships, and I want to eventually be a prescribing psychologist, so there's a lot of extra work that's going to have to go into that. So let's start with And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer. So, okay, so this doesn't work for up close detail work, and I forgot my mirror, so we're just gonna hope for the best. There we go. Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer is essentially a look into dementia and Alzheimer's, and it's told through the lens of a man who has dementia and his favorite grandson, basically. It's a very, very short novella. The entire novella, basically, I listened through it in like, you know, about an hour, actually. My words are not coming to me today. But it's from the perspective of the grandfather that has dementia, and it sort of takes you through his lived experience, and it's so fascinating because unless you have dementia, I mean, we don't truly understand the experience of it. And I think it's not like Backman's claiming like this is exactly what it is, but he's kind of just exploring it and exploring the grief and heartbreak of a family that has to live through a beloved family member having dementia and having to watch those you love like slowly lose themselves over time. And the sad part is, you know, the grandfather, he recognizes it, but he doesn't. And that's where you get the title of the book. And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer. He recognizes that it takes longer and longer for him to get back to where he was, to get back to his old familiar self, the people who love him, and just every aspect of it is so well written, is so poignant that like I was saying, you know, it's only an hour long, and I was just sobbing the whole time because it was just that well written. It was just that well thought out and profound, and he kind of wrote it from what he said, you know, as something he sort of wrote for his children. Not that he's going through dementia, but just kind of as a reflection, like what what do families go through? How does it feel to have to process this as you're going through it? Like, what if I someday develop dementia and my family has to deal with that? And it's really, really hard. It's right here. It's right here. Like I said, I was crying the whole time. I feel like I can't say too much else without just like telling you the entire story, because I mean, it's a novella. It's not that long. So there's not a lot I can say that won't just give everything away. So that's pretty much all I have to say on that one. But if I'm going to suggest you read any of these books, I am going to suggest that you read And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer, because I feel like it only takes an hour and you gain so much out of it that it's like almost like it's like automatically well worth your time, because there's just so much packed into it. And I would say especially if, you know, for me, I'm not going into geriatric psychology by any stretch of the imagination, but I mean, I feel like dementia is like one of those things that people tend to deal with at some point in their lives. And so it's good to, even if it's not specifically your specialty in psychology, you may have a client who has dealt with that with someone else in their life. Or, you know, a client with depression whose mom also happens to have dementia. And so having a sort of understanding of it can be really helpful, not just in your personal life, but in your professional life, if you're going into psychology or the medical field, or you just deal with people who have that, because it's such a widespread like health concern. I just feel like it's something that's really good to sort of get a grip on, understand a little bit. I cannot express enough how much I love that one. And I'm doing a really bad job of explaining it, but I'm just telling you to trust me and go read it. That's what I'm trying to say. Trust me, go read the book. Go read the book. And so the next one is Anxious People. So this is Backman's newest release. It came out last year, and I think it's one of his books that I would say has like the most mixed reviews. I don't think, like, I know that a lot of people liked it but thought it didn't make a lot of sense, or like weren't particularly fond of the plot twists, or there was just a lot of, I feel like, mixed opinions on the actual plot aspects of the book. I still really liked it, and I didn't think it was like, it didn't strike me quite as heavily as And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer. It was still something that I really enjoyed and found a lot of value in. I think what was interesting about that one is that it did focus a lot on mental health, and so I did really appreciate that aspect. And it actually had a psychologist that I didn't think was bad, which that says a lot for literature, because a lot of times I can find a lot of problems. There was definitely a couple mistakes that the psychologist made, but it was kind of acknowledged that she was like an early career psychologist. Like, she was very young and she had an extremely difficult client, like really difficult. So it seemed to me that they were like realistic mistakes, not just like kind of like blatant horrible things that are completely unethical, because that's what you get a lot of times, and that's what you get a lot of times in a lot of books with psychologists or therapists. This one was more like, it was realistic little mistakes that you might make with a extremely difficult, belligerent client. I feel like the actual synopsis for the book doesn't tell you a lot about the actual content of the book, because the synopsis will tell you that it's kind of like a bank heist gone wrong, because there was like a bank robber that went into a cashless bank and didn't realize it was a cashless bank, then went into an apartment viewing and held all of the people at the apartment viewing hostage. A bunch of stuff happens that you don't really know until like you're the whole way through the book, and basically all of the hostages come out, the cops go in, there was a gunshot, and there's no person. And so there was no way for the person to have escaped, but there's also no body in the apartment, so they don't know what happened to the robber. And they're trying to like piecemeal this all together, but it also like kind of in this non-linear way that's very Backman. It sort of hops around time and gives you a picture of the hostage situation itself. It gives you glimpses into the lives of all of the people. So it's not just about any one character, it's about all of the characters that are in the situation and how all of them are dealing with this particular thing. And it gives this really interesting look into mental health and anxiety and suicidality, and how suicide can like affect even the people that weren't like directly affected. like you go specifically into the lives of Jim and Jack, who are the two cops, and Jack is like, the book starts off with basically a man who committed suicide, and Jack was a teenager and tried to stop him but couldn't. So you're kind of seeing how he processed all of that all these years and years later, and all of, like, there's all of these little connections through all of the characters that you don't really get until you get a lot further in. I can't go into a lot more detail about plot specifically because almost anything you say about the plot of this book is a spoiler in some capacity. Really, basically everything is a spoiler in some capacity with this one. Okay, this is my first time using this foundation, and I think, see, it looked light enough in the tin, and now that I have it on my hand, I'm thinking it might still be too dark. Dang it. I think it's definitely too warm, but we can fix that. It's fine. Anyway, Backman's character work is just always stunning. There was a couple things where I wasn't quite sure plot-wise if like that would have been maybe my favorite choice, but I can still like see why he did it and respect it. And he's just like one of those authors. Like, you can tell everything he does is super well thought through, super intentional. There's nothing he does that's really, like, even if it wouldn't necessarily be how you want to do it, you can see why he did it. You know? There's a couple like little plot things where I was like, I kind of wish he did it this way. Specifically with one of the twists associated with the robber, I was just like, I kind of wish it had been how I originally thought it was. And then he switched it and I was like, makes sense for what he did with the plot, but still kind of wish he'd kept it the way I thought it was originally, but whatever. I really hope this doesn't oxidize or I am in trouble. It doesn't have a lot of coverage. I feel like I was hoping it would have a little bit more coverage than it does. It's such a weird style of... So I did just want to like throw out a couple of little opinions, like little things I liked that aren't really spoilers. So one of the things I like is there was this quote that was like, you mustn't throw stones at birds. We can all agree on that, except maybe Swan, because swans can actually be passive-aggressive little bastards. And yes, that just made me, I read that and it made me laugh out loud. And it has almost nothing to do with anything, but it's like little quotes like that where he just draws you in, and I love it. He does a lot of repetition, and I really appreciate how he does it, because it's not really done in the way of like, oh, he's saying that for the millionth time. It's like when he does it, it's there for a reason to remind you that it's important. Like, there's this thing with a drawing. Like, at first, like, the characters don't know what the drawings are supposed to be of, and you find out it's of like a frog, a monkey, and an elk, and it's like a kid's drawing, and they keep bringing your attention to the drawing, and as the story develops, your understanding of the drawing develops. And I thought that was really clever. And so whenever he draws your attention to that drawing, it's making a specific point about what you know at that point in the story about specific characters and their lives. And so I thought that was like a really clever way to do that. And he does a really good job at making you empathize with every single character. He even does a really good job of making you empathize with the characters who shouldn't be empathetic. Like, Zara is, like, she's the one I talked about who I thought was was an extremely hostile patient with a psychologist. She is not a nice person. And he has this mastery of character where he shows you a person that is entirely unpleasant, very hostile, very just not a good person, not a nice person, and still is somehow able to have you understand that they're not a nice person, but still make you feel empathy for them. And I think that is a really interesting skill. I don't know quite how you do that at all. Like, I don't understand it. By the time you get to the end, you see how everything connects, and he, like I said, it is very non-linear. It's not quite circular, but it's definitely not linear. I would say it's kind of like it all connects in the end, so it's like a circle but with like little spirals and squigglies all over the place. He's kind of the definition of writing in wibbly wobbly timey-wimey, but like everything connects pretty perfectly. And like, even though there's a couple plot things I was like, I'm not sure that was my favorite, it's still so poignant, and his character work is so stunning that it's still definitely worth a read. I think his writing style probably isn't for everyone because it does take some time to get used to that sort of non-linear style. So if like all you've ever read is like very like very Western linear sort of centric books and you're very uncomfortable with anything that's non-linear, it might take you some time. It might take you some significant time actually to get used to his style of writing, but I think it's definitely worth it and I would definitely give it a try. Again, I would maybe start with maybe one of the novellas, or I know he has some other ones that I think probably aren't as like twisty as this one, and definitely Man Called Ove, that one kind of fits in there where it's not quite as twisty in the like timeline linear sense. Speaking of, we're gonna move on to that one, and I kind of wanted to touch on, so this one is a lot more of kind of your standard writing style, I would say, which is probably why it's one of his most popular books. Like probably if you've heard of Backman, you've heard of A Man Called Ove. And it looks like, if you're looking at the spelling, it looks like Ove, but it's Ove because I listened to the audiobook, so I know how it's pronounced. That's the nice thing about audiobooks. The downside to audiobooks is that you know how things are supposed to be pronounced, but you don't always know how things are supposed to be spelled. So sometimes when I'm trying to like look up a character, I have no idea how their names are spelled. It's very frustrating. Anyway, so A Man Called Ove basically tells you the life story and times of a crotchety old man named Ove and how he got to be a crotchety old man. And it sort of takes you through his whole life experience from childhood to adulthood. And again, I think this is an instance of really showing how Backman is good at making you feel empathy for characters that are not very likable. Like if you met them in real life, you would probably avoid them because they're not likable. They're not necessarily pleasant people. You wouldn't want to spend a lot of time with them, but he makes you feel so much empathy for them that you're like, no, I love them so much. They're like, oh. Like he's just top notch at that. So Ove definitely fits into that because like I said, he is like the definition of crotchety old man, like get off my lawn, get out of my parking lot. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to see you. It deals a lot with just a lot of stuff, a lot of trauma and a lot of like suicidality. Like you're dealing with an older character, and I think that that makes it a lot more poignant because a lot of suicides do tend to happen in like older people, and I think it's kind of overlooked actually, because I think we focus so much on, which all suicide is tragic, but like you tend to focus more on the ones that happen when people are really young and you're like, oh, they had so much life left to live, which yes, but I think especially from a media perspective, they tend to focus more on sort of the younger, as like the younger people who are suicidal rather than the older people who are suicidal. And I actually, like when I was in my undergrad, I did this whole paper on depression in older adults, and it really is like a problem that I think gets really overlooked. And so I thought that the way Backman dealt with it was actually really good in showing that sometimes all people really need is they need connection. They need people to come alongside of them. And I think we focus a lot on medicines and, you know, therapy and all and everything, and that's obviously really important too. But I think one of the other things that can tend to be overlooked is actually the value of social support. Just having people that will stand by you no matter what, that will help you when, you know, when you're at your worst. And when we start off with Ove as an older man, he has no one, and he says he doesn't want anyone, but he, like, through the book, his neighbor Parvana kind of forces her way into his life, and through the course of the book they build friendship, and by the end doesn't kill himself because he has the social support of his friends. I thought the way it was written was really powerful. I really appreciated it. And I don't think it was like, wasn't like in an anti-medicine or anti-therapy way by any stretch of the imagination. It was more in a looking at the power of what human relationships are capable of. And you see that throughout Uve's life, because you see how, you know, he went through a lot of trauma when he was younger, and you saw how just having this beautiful romance and relationship with his wife, like, really did the best for him. And how hardworking and dedicated he was to doing the right thing, to being a moral person. And so even though he wasn't a pleasant person, you could empathize with him being a moral person, and you could see how important relationships and specific people in his life were to keeping him healthy. And we get into him as an older man. like after his wife has passed and he thinks he doesn't have anything left to live for. That's when we get into having Parvana and her family and all these other people come in, and you know, he sees that social relationships can be really rewarding. He realizes he does have people that care about him, and then slowly he allows them to care about him. He definitely didn't necessarily want it at first, but he, over the course of the book, allows people back into his life. I just thought it was very sweetly written, very well done. Kind of what I wanted to say about that was just he's very good at his character work, making you feel for and understand an individual and how they became who they were, and how important relationships are, how much they can literally save someone's life. Like even at one point, before Ove even allows like people to re-enter his life, he actually allows like a cat to re-enter his life. You just have to have something to live for, something to keep you invested, engaged in life. And that's actually it's a fairly common phenomena. You know, not in every situation, but in a lot of situations, people will literally stay alive for their pets or stay alive for like one specific thing, and that's completely valid. If that's what keeps you alive, if that's what keeps you going, that's good. And I really liked the way it developed his character, the way you saw him sort of go from jaded to in love to jaded again to working really hard because his entire life revolved around his wife, to when she died becoming even more jaded and closed off and guarded than ever before, and then very, very slowly opening back up again and letting people back into his life. And it was so sweet, so well written. And it ends like at the end of the book, it does kind of take you all the way to the end of Uva's life. And one of the things I loved at the end, because I did cry, it was very sweet, like a very sweet like found family epilogue. And I love found family. It makes me so happy. At the end it says, more than 300 people came to the funeral. Ove would have hated it. And that sentence just kind of tells you all the heartwarming stuff you need to know. It takes you through the entire life of one person from beginning to end, and how their lives are touched by their relationships with other people, and how other people are touched by them. And it's so good. It's so good. So with that being said, this is the final look. Because, like I said at the beginning, I wanted to kind of focus on stuff that was sort of everyday, but in a special way. So I used a couple multi-chrome shadows because, and I specifically used, I don't know what this one is. This one is Mirage from Terra Moons. I did my finger in it, but it's this one that has this really cool, yeah, you can kind of see it. It has this cool, like, bronzy green shift. And I also used this one called Solar Flare that has, hold on, you can, yeah, definitely can't see it here. That one has like kind of just like a goldy greenish red shift that I used for my highlighter. I wanted something that like kind of, it looks kind of normal and innocuous at first, but then has something really special to it, which multi-chrome pigments definitely have. I also used just a little bit of special sparkle here on my lips. So that's pretty much the gist of what I wanted to say about the 3 Backman books individually. Like I said, he just writes, I feel like he's just so good at writing humanity. Writing emotions and like experiences like dementia, like grief, like anxiety and suicidality in a way that's just so like you can just connect to on such a deep level. The way he describes it, you just feel it in your soul. And sometimes it's not even like, you know, he doesn't just describe things like he was sad. He uses metaphors, he uses the situations the characters are in to really get you into their mind and get you into their experiences and how they're feeling things. This is even coming from like a translated work, so I can only imagine how poignant it is in the original. I think it's Swedish. Yeah, he's Swedish. And so also shout out to whoever translates his books. I don't know if it's the same person every time, but either way, like also congrats to the translator for just doing an absolutely marvelous job at capturing Backman's words. I would absolutely recommend him. I think he is a fabulous author. I think he's definitely one of my favorite authors now. I will definitely be reading more of his works. There's one he has out called Beartown that I think that I think looks really interesting. He has a lot of books out, honestly. Yeah, so let's see. Other ones that I'm going to be checking out. So there's Beartown, My Grandmother Asked You to Tell Me She's Sorry, Britt Marie Was Here, Us Against You, Things My Son Needs to Know About the World, The Deal of a Lifetime. And that he's also a journalist, so there's like other journalist things. I think those are all of his novels that I haven't read. So I will definitely be reading more of them. If you have read Backman, what are your thoughts? Do you agree with me about just how brilliant and amazing and poignant of a writer he is? You should. You don't have to, it's fine. But you should. Anyway, so thank you so much for joining me today. I know this is kind of a quick one, but I just kind of wanted to talk about how much I love Backman and his books. Read his books. They're very good. They're better than I can describe them as. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have an absolutely beautiful day. Stay magic. Keep reading. I love you all so much. Goodbye.